The alarm on my console screamed before I even opened my eyes. Red light filled the small cabin of our transport ship, and I knew, in that half-second between sleep and waking, that something had gone wrong. I was Daniel Reyes, 26 years old, 3 weeks into my first deep space mission, and I had no idea that the next few hours would change how an entire galaxy saw my species. I pulled myself out of the bunk and grabbed the handrail as the ship shuddered. Outside my small window, the black of space was broken by a massive shape, a station so large it blocked out the stars behind it. This was the heart of the Kalan Assembly, a union of alien worlds that had existed for thousands of years before humans ever left our own solar system. We had been invited here, or so we believed, to offer help. Our small fleet carried food processing units, medical scanners, and water purification systems built by human engineers. Our planet had faced disasters before, droughts, storms, and diseases, and we had learned to survive them with tools that were simple but effective. When the Assembly sent word that several of their member worlds were suffering from crop failures and disease outbreaks, our leaders saw a chance to prove that humanity could be a good neighbor among the stars. I was part of the support crew, not important enough to speak in any official meeting, but important enough to see everything. I stood in the cargo bay, checking straps on containers filled with seed banks and portable clinics, when Laura Bennett walked past me. She was our lead ambassador, calm and sharp, the kind of person who could walk into a room of arguing generals and leave with a signed treaty. "You look nervous, Reyes," she said, not unkindly. "I've never met an alien before," I admitted, "let alone thousands of them staring at our fleet." She smiled, though I could see the tension behind her eyes. "Then let's give them something worth staring at." Our ship was called the Horizon. It was not the biggest vessel humanity owned, but it was fast, dependable, and full of good people. Our commander, Owen Blake, had spent 15 years in deep space exploration before this mission. He believed strongly in the idea that helping others, even those who looked down on us, was the right path for a young species trying to earn its place among the stars. As we approached the docking bay of the assembly station, I felt the ship's engines hum beneath my feet, a sound I had grown to trust. Through the window, I could see other ships already docked, sleek and elegant, built by species who had been traveling between stars since before early humans discovered fire. Compared to them, our ship looked like a rough stone next to polished glass. When the docking clamps locked into place, a small crowd of us gathered at the entry ramp. Nathan Cole, our chief scientist, stood beside Blake, holding a datapad filled with reports on the crisis facing several assembly worlds. He had spent months studying their situation from data shared before our arrival, and he believed our tools could solve problems that had troubled them for years. The doors opened, and cold air rushed in, carrying a strange scent I did not recognize, something between metal and rain. Waiting for us was a delegation of aliens, tall, elegant beings with smooth gray skin and eyes that shimmered faintly, like light passing through water. Their leader stepped forward, robes trailing behind him, and introduced himself as Director Kesserin, a senior voice on the Assembly Council. He looked at our group, at our simple uniforms, our plain ship, our containers stacked with equipment that must have looked crude to him, and I saw something in his expression that I would later understand as quiet judgment. "You have traveled far," he said, his voice smooth and measured. "The Council will hear your proposal." We were led through wide corridors lined with lights that shifted color, depending on who walked beneath them. Every surface seemed designed with purpose, nothing wasted, nothing simple. I tried not to stare, but it was hard not to feel small in a place built by minds so much older than mine. The council chamber was a massive circular room, with seats rising in tiers around a central platform. Dozens of alien species sat in those seats, delegates from worlds I had never heard of, each with their own strange and beautiful features. When we walked to the center platform, a wave of quiet murmurs spread through the chamber, some curious, some clearly amused. Blake stood tall despite the pressure of so many eyes upon him. He spoke first, his voice steady and clear. "We came because we heard of the hardships facing several of your member worlds," he said. "Crop failures, water shortages, and a rising sickness affecting your youngest generations. We believe we can help." Cole stepped forward next, presenting data on a floating screen that showed our proposed solutions. Water purification systems built from simple, durable materials, seed banks resistant to disease, and portable medical scanners, designed to work even without advanced power sources. I watched the faces in the crowd as he spoke. Some seemed politely interested. Others exchanged glances that made my stomach tighten. When Cole finished, silence filled the chamber for a long moment. Then Director Kesserin rose from his seat. "You bring us tools built from your world's limited understanding," he said, "and expect us to believe they can solve problems that have challenged even our advanced scientists?" Laughter rippled through parts of the chamber. I felt my face grow hot with embarrassment, though I said nothing, standing at the back where I belonged. Blake did not flinch. "Simplicity does not mean weakness," he said. "Our solutions work because they are built to survive difficult conditions, the same conditions your worlds are facing right now." Another delegate, a being with shimmering blue scales, spoke up. "Your species has only recently discovered space travel. You ask us to trust tools built by a civilization still learning to walk among the stars." The words stung more than I expected. I glanced at Bennett, hoping she might respond, and she did, her voice calm but firm. "Every civilization begins somewhere," she said. "Ours simply began later than yours. That does not mean we have nothing to offer." Kesserin studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he turned to address the chamber. "We appreciate the gesture," he said, though his tone carried little appreciation at all. "But the assembly does not require aid from a species still finding its footing among civilized worlds." A wave of quiet agreement moved through the chamber, nods and murmurs from dozens of delegates who had likely made up their minds before we ever arrived. I felt a heavy weight settle over our group, the realization that we had traveled so far, only to be dismissed without a real chance. Cole tried once more. "The crisis on your outer worlds will not wait for pride," he said carefully. "Our data shows the disease spreading faster than your current methods can contain." Kesserin's expression hardened slightly. "Our scientists are aware of the situation," he said. "We do not need a young species lecturing us on matters we understand far better than you ever could." The room fell silent again, and I understood then that the meeting had already ended in the minds of most who sat before us, even though no one had spoken the final word yet. Blake exchanged a glance with Bennett, and I could see the disappointment behind his composed expression. Still, he tried one last time. "If circumstances change," he said, "our offer remains open." Kesserin gave a slight nod, more out of formality than sincerity. "We will remember your visit," he said, and something in the way he said it made it sound less like gratitude and more like a warning. We were escorted back through the same corridors, the same shifting lights, the same cold air carrying that strange scent. No one spoke much on the way back to our ship. I could feel the disappointment radiating from every member of our team, though none of them expressed anger, only quiet frustration. As we boarded the horizon, I glanced back one more time toward the massive station, its lights glittering against the darkness of space, home to a civilization that had just refused our help without a second thought. I did not yet understand how deeply that refusal would matter in the years to come, but standing there at the edge of the docking bay, watching the doors close behind us, I felt a strange, quiet certainty settle in my chest. This was not the end of the story between humanity and the Kalan Assembly. It was only the beginning. As the horizon detached from the station and drifted back into open space, Cole remained at the observation window, staring out at the massive structure shrinking behind us. His jaw was tight, his eyes distant, as though he were replaying every word spoken in that chamber. "They didn't even look at the data properly," he muttered. Bennett placed a hand on his shoulder. "Some doors take longer to open," she said. "Sometimes they don't open until there's no other choice." I did not understand the full weight of her words yet, but something about the calm certainty in her voice stayed with me long after we left assembly space behind, the first quiet thread in a story that would take 15 years to fully unfold. The horizon had barely cleared the docking arms of the assembly station when Blake called us together in the main briefing room. I expected quiet disappointment, maybe a short debrief before we set course for home. Instead, I found the room already tense, the air thick with something closer to alarm. "They broadcast it," Bennett said, standing near the main screen, her arms crossed. "The whole meeting, It's already spreading across assembly networks. My stomach dropped. I had assumed the humiliation in that council chamber would stay contained within those walls, a private disappointment we could quietly carry home. Instead, the recording of our rejection was being shared across dozens of allied systems, turned into a message about the foolishness of a young species trying to offer help it was not qualified to give. Cole pulled up a data feed on the main screen, and I watched as clips of the meeting played across various assembly news channels. Director Kesserin's words echoed through the room again, this time paired with commentary from other species, some amused, some outright dismissive. One commentator, a being from a species called the Threnal, spoke with open scorn. The humans arrived with tools better suited for a farming village than a galactic crisis, he said, his voice carrying easily through the translated broadcast. It is almost admirable, their confidence, despite their evident lack of understanding. Another clip showed a public gathering on one of the assembly's central worlds, where a crowd had gathered around a public screen to watch the recording. Laughter rippled through the crowd as our proposed water systems were shown next to advanced purification towers used by assembly worlds, the comparison framed to make our technology look almost embarrassing. I felt anger rising in my chest, but beneath it, something heavier, a sense of shame I had not expected to feel. We had come with good intentions, and now those intentions were being twisted into a public spectacle, a lesson in humility aimed squarely at humanity. Blake watched the footage in silence, his expression unreadable, though I could see his hands clenched tightly at his sides. When the final clip ended, he turned to face the room. "This changes nothing about our mission," he said, though his voice carried a rare edge of frustration. "We came to help. That has not changed." "They don't want our help," Cole said sharply. "They want us to know our place." Bennett shook her head slowly. "Not all of them," she said, "but enough of them, for now." A message arrived on the ship's communication system moments later, official and formal, carrying the seal of the Kalen Assembly Council. Blake opened it, and the room fell silent as he read it aloud. "By order of the Council, human vessels are instructed to depart assembly space immediately. Future visits without formal invitation will be considered a violation of assembly protocol and may result in restricted access to trade routes." The words hung in the air, heavier than any insult spoken in that chamber. It was one thing to be mocked. It was another to be formally dismissed, told that our presence itself was unwelcome, unless summoned on their terms. I looked around the room, searching the faces of my crewmates for some sign of what to feel. Anger, perhaps, or defeat. Instead, I saw something quieter, a shared resolve settling over each of them, though none of them spoke it aloud yet. Blake finally broke the silence. "Set a course for home," he said. "We're done here." As the horizon began its slow turn away from assembly space, I made my way back to the observation deck, needing a moment alone with my thoughts. The massive station still hung in the distance, smaller now, but no less imposing. Cole joined me there a few minutes later, staring out at the same view. "You know what bothers me most," he said quietly. "It's not that they refused our help. It's that they refused to even consider it. They looked at our data, at everything we tried to explain, and they saw nothing but a lesser species trying to act important." "Do you think they're wrong?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. Cole was quiet for a long moment. "No," he said finally. "I think they're scared. Scared of what it means if a species like ours, young, unrefined, still learning, manages to solve a problem their advanced science hasn't been able to fix." I thought about his words long after he left the observation deck. Scared or not, the assembly's dismissal had done its damage. As we traveled back toward human space, more messages arrived, clips of the meeting circulating further, commentary from other species growing bolder in their mockery. Some jokes were harmless, others cutting deeper, framing humanity as a species destined to remain minor players among the stars, too proud for our own good, too simple to matter. By the time we reached Earth's orbit, the story had already spread through our own networks as well. News channels back home picked up the footage, and public opinion split sharply. Some argued that we should never again offer aid to species who so clearly looked down on us. Others insisted that true strength meant continuing to offer help regardless of how it was received. I remember standing in the crowded arrival bay as our ship docked at the orbital station above Earth, watching Blake address a small group of reporters gathered to hear our account of the mission. He spoke carefully, avoiding blame, focusing instead on lessons learned and the importance of patience. But later that night, in a quiet debrief with just our crew present, his composure finally cracked, just slightly. "We offered them a solution to a crisis that could save thousands of lives," he said, his voice low but firm. "And they turned it into entertainment for their allies." Bennett placed a hand on the table between them. "Then we remember this," she said, not with anger, but with patience. "One day, that crisis will grow beyond their ability to control it, and when it does, we will still be here." Her words settled over the room like a quiet promise, one none of us fully understood yet, but one that would echo through the years that followed. I did not know it then, standing in that small briefing room, exhausted and humiliated after our failed mission, that her words would come to define the next chapter of humanity's place among the stars. For now, all I felt was the sting of mockery, the weight of a rejection broadcast across a galaxy that saw us as nothing more than an amusing footnote in their long advanced history. But even in that sting, a quiet resolve had already begun to take root, one that would grow silently over the next 15 years, waiting patiently for the day the galaxy would need us again. Before we left assembly space entirely, one final exchange took place, one that few people back home ever heard about, but one that stayed with me longer than the public mockery ever did. Cole had requested a private channel with a junior member of the Assembly's Science Council, a quiet researcher named Velen, who had shown genuine interest in our data during the earlier meeting, even as his colleagues dismissed it. Velen answered the call from a small private office, his expression cautious, clearly aware that speaking with us carried some risk to his standing among his peers. "I do not have much time," he said quietly. "The council would not approve of this conversation." Cole nodded, keeping his tone calm and respectful. "I only wanted to share one thing before we leave," he said. "Our data shows the disease affecting your outer worlds is mutating faster than your current treatments can adapt to. Within a few years, if left unchecked, it will spread beyond containment, and your traditional purification systems will not be enough to stop the water contamination that follows." Velen's expression flickered with something like concern, quickly hidden behind practiced composure. "The council believes the situation is under control. The council did not review our data properly," Cole said, his voice firm but not unkind. "I understand the political weight of what happened today. I am not asking you to convince them of anything. I am simply asking you to remember this conversation, in case the day comes when the situation changes." Velen was silent for a long moment, his eyes drifting toward the door, perhaps checking that no one else could hear. "Why would you offer this?" he asked finally, "after everything said today?" Cole considered the question carefully before answering. "Because our goal was never to prove ourselves right," he said. "It was to help. That has not changed, even if your council refuses to see it that way." The call ended shortly after, Velen offering only a quiet nod before disconnecting. Cole shared the exchange with Blake and Bennett, though none of us expected it to matter much beyond that moment. It felt, at the time, like a small, private act of decency in the middle of a much larger humiliation, nothing more. The journey back to Earth took several weeks, long enough for the initial sting of rejection to soften into something quieter, more thoughtful. I spent much of that time in the ship's engineering bay, running diagnostics I did not need to run, simply needing something to occupy my hands while my mind processed everything that had happened. Blake called one final meeting before we reached Earth's orbit, gathering the senior members of our mission in the briefing room. The mood was calmer than it had been in the days immediately following our rejection, though the weight of what happened still lingered in every conversation. "We are not the last humans who will encounter the assembly," Blake said, addressing the room. "Whatever happened here, whatever mockery follows us home, I want us to remember why we came. Not for recognition, not for approval. We came because people needed help, and we had the ability to offer it." Bennett nodded in agreement. "The galaxy is large," she said. "The assembly is only one part of it. There will be other opportunities, other species willing to see past first impressions." Cole remained quiet for most of the meeting, his thoughts clearly still lingering on his conversation with Velen. Finally he spoke. "I don't think this is over," he said. "Not because I want revenge, but because the problem we identified is real. Whether they choose to see it or not, that crisis is coming for them. And when it arrives, they will remember exactly who tried to warn them." No one responded immediately, the weight of his words settling over the room. I did not fully understand yet how prophetic that statement would become, but something about the quiet certainty in his voice stayed with me, the same way Bennett's earlier promise had. When we finally arrived back at Earth, the public reaction to our mission was mixed, as expected. Some praised our effort as a noble attempt, regardless of the outcome. Others criticized our leaders for sending us into a situation destined for humiliation. Political debates flared across news networks, arguments about whether humanity should continue reaching outward, or focus instead on strengthening our own systems first. Blake was called before a government council, shortly after our return, tasked with explaining the outcome of our mission in detail. I was not present for that meeting, but Bennett later told me that Blake had remained composed throughout, refusing to frame the mission as a failure, insisting instead that it revealed important information about how the galaxy viewed us, and how we might need to adjust our approach moving forward. In the months that followed, something quietly shifted within humanity's space programs. Funding increased for engineering projects, focused on resilience and self-sufficiency. Research into medical and agricultural technology accelerated, driven partly by national pride, partly by a quiet desire to prove the mockery wrong, even if no one said it outright. I returned to my regular duties after the mission, working on various engineering projects across different ships, but I never forgot the humiliation of that council chamber, nor the strange, quiet exchange between Cole and Velen that took place just before we left. It felt, even then, like a small seed planted in soil that would take years to bear fruit. 15 years is a long time, long enough for a young engineer to become a seasoned officer, long enough for humiliation to fade into memory, and long enough for warnings ignored to become disasters realized. I did not know, as our ship crossed back into Earth's familiar orbit, that the quiet promise made in that briefing room, and the private warning shared in that final call with Velen, would one day bring humanity back to assembly space, under very different circumstances. For now, all any of us could do was return home, carry the sting of rejection quietly, and wait to see what the future would bring. 15 years change a person in ways they rarely notice until they look back. I was no longer the nervous young engineer checking cargo straps in the belly of a transport ship. I had become captain of my own vessel, the Meridian, a mid-sized exploration and relief ship built from lessons learned during that humiliating first encounter with the Kalen assembly. Every system on my ship reflected those lessons. Simple, where simplicity meant reliability. Advanced, where advancement meant survival. Humanity had not spent those 15 years sitting quietly, licking old wounds. Instead, something had shifted after our return from assembly space. A quiet determination that spread through our engineering schools, our research labs, and our expanding network of colonies across nearby star systems. We stopped seeking approval from species who had already made up their minds about us. Instead, we focused on becoming the kind of civilization whose value could not be denied, whether others chose to see it or not. Our medical technology advanced rapidly, driven by scientists who remembered the mockery aimed at our early proposals, and used it as motivation rather than discouragement. Portable clinics that once seemed primitive became compact marvels, capable of treating diseases with remarkable efficiency. Our water purification systems, once dismissed as village-level tools, evolved into some of the most reliable technology in known space, prized for their ability to function even in the harshest, most resource-limited environments. We also expanded our alliances, quietly building relationships with smaller species who had been overlooked or dismissed by larger powers like the Kalen Assembly. These partnerships were built on mutual respect rather than hierarchy, something many of these smaller species had rarely experienced before encountering humanity. Word spread slowly among certain corners of the galaxy, not through grand announcements, but through quiet gratitude passed between allied worlds, that humans, whatever their humble beginnings, kept their promises and delivered real solutions. Cole, now a senior researcher overseeing several key scientific divisions, often reminded younger engineers of the lesson learned during our first encounter with the assembly. Never build for approval. he would say during training sessions. Build for survival. Approval follows survival, not the other way around. Bennett had risen through diplomatic ranks as well, now serving as one of humanity's senior representatives in dealings with the wider galactic community. Though the wound from our early humiliation had faded from public memory, she never forgot the significance of that moment, often referencing it quietly in strategy meetings as a reminder of how quickly perception could shift once real need arose. Meanwhile, reports from assembly space grew increasingly troubling over the years, filtering through limited trade channels and diplomatic contacts maintained by smaller, independent species. The crisis Cole had warned about during that private call with Velen had indeed grown, slowly but steadily, exactly as predicted. Diseases once considered manageable had mutated further, spreading through outer worlds despite continued efforts by assembly scientists to contain them. Compounding the problem, decades of political stagnation within the Assembly Council left little room for adaptive solutions. Pride, layered over generations of unquestioned authority, made it difficult for their scientists to pursue unconventional approaches, especially ones that might resemble ideas once mocked as beneath their advanced civilization. Reports suggested growing unrest among outer member worlds, frustration directed at a council more concerned with maintaining appearances than solving real problems. I followed these reports closely, partly out of professional curiosity, partly because I never fully let go of the memory of that humiliating council chamber all those years ago. I often wondered about Velen, the quiet researcher who had listened when no one else would, and whether his warning had ever reached anyone willing to act on it. During this period, my own career advanced steadily. I led several successful relief missions to smaller, independent worlds, facing crises of their own, honing both my technical skills and my understanding of how to navigate delicate political situations. Each mission reinforced the same lesson learned years earlier, that true strength lay not in grand displays of advanced technology, but in reliable solutions built with care and humility. One particular mission stood out during those years, a visit to a small agricultural world called Farron, home to a modest population struggling with soil depletion after decades of poor farming practices. Unlike the Assembly Council, the leaders of Farron welcomed our assistance with open gratitude, working alongside our engineers to implement solutions tailored specifically to their unique environment. Watching their fields recover over the following months, transforming from barren dust into productive farmland once again, reminded me exactly why humanity continued reaching outward despite past humiliations. It was during a return trip from Farron that I received an unexpected message, routed through several diplomatic channels before finally reaching my ship. It came from Velen, now apparently a senior figure within the Assembly's Science Division, his message carefully worded, clearly aware of the political risk involved in reaching out after so many years. The message was brief, formal on the surface, but carrying an undertone of quiet urgency. He acknowledged our previous encounter, referenced the private conversation shared with Cole all those years ago, and hinted, without stating outright, that circumstances within assembly space had grown significantly worse than official reports suggested. I forwarded the message immediately to Cole and Bennett, both of whom recognized its significance right away. Bennett arranged a secure call with Velen shortly after, careful to avoid drawing unwanted attention from assembly officials who might view such contact unfavorably. During that call, Velen finally admitted what official channels had long tried to hide. The disease crisis had spread far beyond initial containment efforts, affecting not just outer worlds but now threatening core assembly systems as well. Compounding the disaster, prolonged agricultural mismanagement, worsened by rigid adherence to outdated methods, had led to severe food shortages across multiple member worlds. The Council still refuses to acknowledge the full scope of the crisis publicly, Velen admitted during the call, his voice carrying visible exhaustion. Pride remains a powerful force here, even as our people suffer. Bennett listened carefully, weighing the political implications of what she was hearing. Why reach out to us now, she asked, after everything that happened years ago? Velen was quiet for a moment before answering. Because your solutions were never the problem, he said finally. Our pride was, and pride does not feed hungry children or heal the sick. The call ended shortly after, leaving Bennett, Cole, and myself with much to discuss. None of us spoke immediately of forgiveness or reconciliation, the wound from years ago still present, even if faded. Instead, we focused on the practical reality of the situation, a crisis growing beyond the Assembly's ability to manage alone, and a quiet request for help hidden carefully behind careful diplomatic language. I remember standing on the observation deck of the Meridian that night, staring out at the stars, thinking back to the humiliation experienced in that council chamber 15 years earlier. So much had changed since then, both for humanity and, apparently, for the Assembly as well. I did not yet know how soon we would be called upon to respond, nor how dramatically the balance of respect between our two civilizations was about to shift. For now, all any of us could do was wait, quietly prepared, remembering both the humiliation of the past and the quiet promise made in its aftermath, that when the moment came, humanity would still be there. The official distress signal arrived 3 weeks after Velen's private call, broadcast openly across recognized diplomatic channels, rather than hidden behind quiet, unofficial contact. I was in the middle of a routine supply run near one of our outer colonies when Bennett's message reached my ship, marked urgent, requesting my immediate presence at a strategic briefing back on Earth. By the time I arrived, the briefing room was already crowded with senior officials, scientists, and military advisors, all gathered around a large central screen, displaying the formal request from the Kalan Assembly Council. I recognized the tone immediately, formal and careful, though beneath the careful diplomatic language, desperation was clearly visible. The message detailed a crisis far more severe than even Velen had suggested during his earlier call. The disease affecting outer worlds had mutated further, now resistant to nearly every treatment Assembly scientists had developed. Compounding this, widespread crop failures had led to food shortages affecting billions of Assembly citizens, with projections showing conditions worsening rapidly without outside intervention. Most striking of all was the final line of the message, an admission that must have cost the Council significant pride to include. It acknowledged, directly, that solutions proposed by humanity 15 years earlier, solutions once dismissed as primitive, closely resembled approaches now being considered as potential emergency measures. Blake, now serving as a senior military advisor after years of continued service, addressed the room once the message finished playing. Age had softened some of his sharper edges, but the same quiet determination remained clearly present in his voice. "They are asking for help," he said simply. "The question now is whether we choose to give it." The room fell into immediate debate. Some officials argued strongly against involvement, citing the humiliation experienced 15 years earlier as reason enough to withhold assistance now that circumstances had reversed. Others argued that humanity's values should not depend on how we were treated in return, that offering help, even to those who once mocked us, defined the kind of civilization we wanted to become. I listened carefully to both sides, understanding the emotional weight behind each argument. Part of me remembered clearly the sting of humiliation experienced in that council chamber all those years ago, the laughter, the dismissive words, the formal order demanding our departure from assembly space. Another part of me remembered Cole's quiet words spoken shortly after that humiliation, that our goal was never to prove ourselves right, but simply to help. Bennett, now among the most senior diplomats present, finally spoke, her voice cutting cleanly through the debate. "We are not the same civilization we were 15 years ago," she said. "Neither, it seems, are they. The question is not whether they deserve our help. The question is whether helping them reflects who we choose to be." Cole, seated near the front of the room, added his own perspective, calm but firm. "I warned them 15 years ago about exactly this outcome," he said. "They dismissed that warning out of pride. Now pride has cost them dearly. If we go on our own terms, not to relive old humiliations, but to demonstrate the strength of solutions they once mocked." His words settled over the room, shifting the tone of the debate significantly. Slowly, the arguments against involvement softened, replaced instead by discussions of strategy, logistics, and the practical realities of organizing a relief mission on the scale required to address the Assembly's crisis. I was called upon during the briefing to provide input regarding logistical capabilities, given my extensive experience leading relief missions to smaller, independent worlds over the previous years. I outlined the resources available, the ships capable of deployment, and the medical and agricultural technology developed and refined since our humiliating first encounter with the assembly. As the briefing progressed, it became clear that a decision had effectively been made, though final approval still required formal government authorization. Blake turned to me directly toward the end of the meeting, his expression serious. "Captain Reyes," he said, "given your experience and your presence during our original encounter with the assembly, I would like you to lead this mission, assuming approval is granted." I felt a mixture of pride and apprehension at his request, memories of that humiliating council chamber flooding back vividly. Leading this mission meant returning to the very place where humanity had once been mocked and dismissed, this time carrying the responsibility of representing how far we had come. "I accept," I said simply, though my mind was already racing through the logistical challenges ahead. Formal government approval arrived within days, driven partly by genuine humanitarian concern, partly by recognition of the diplomatic opportunity presented by the situation. Preparations began immediately, assembling relief ships, medical teams, agricultural specialists, and engineers experienced in rapid deployment of humanitarian technology. During preparations, I received another private message from Velen, this time carrying visible relief at the news of our impending response. He offered detailed information regarding conditions within assembly space, information that would prove invaluable in planning our approach. "I did not expect gratitude 15 years ago," he wrote, "given how our council treated your delegation. I am grateful now, more than words can properly express, that your species chooses compassion over resentment." I read his message several times before responding, carefully choosing my words. "We remember what happened," I wrote back honestly, "but we also remember why we came originally. That reason has not changed." As preparations continued, I found myself reflecting often on the strange twist of circumstances that had brought humanity back to this point. 15 years earlier, we arrived as eager, hopeful representatives of a young species seeking approval from an older, more established civilization. Now we returned not seeking approval, but offering assistance from a position of quiet strength, earned through years of dedication, resilience, and continued commitment to helping others, regardless of how we ourselves had once been treated. Cole joined me briefly during final preparations, watching as engineering teams loaded the last of our medical and agricultural equipment onto our relief fleet. "Do you remember what I told you?" he asked, "right after we left assembly space that first time?" I nodded. "You said this wasn't over. That the crisis we warned them about was real, whether they chose to see it or not." He smiled slightly, a rare expression given the seriousness surrounding our preparations. "Sometimes it feels strange being right about something so difficult," he admitted. "I take no satisfaction in their suffering. But I do take satisfaction in knowing that we remained ready to help, exactly as promised." As our relief fleet prepared for departure, I stood once more on the observation deck of my ship, staring out at the distant stars, remembering clearly the humiliation experienced during our first encounter with the assembly all those years ago. This time, however, that memory carried a different weight, no longer simply painful, but transformed into quiet motivation, a reminder of exactly how far humanity had come since that difficult day. We were not returning to assembly space seeking validation or approval. We were returning because circumstances had changed, because a crisis once dismissed with laughter had grown into a genuine emergency, and because humanity, despite everything experienced 15 years earlier, still believed firmly in the value of offering help to those in need. As our fleet finally departed Earth's orbit, beginning the long journey back toward assembly space, I felt a quiet, steady resolve settle over me. The same resolve I imagine Blake and Bennett must have felt standing in that humiliating council chamber all those years ago. Whatever awaited us upon arrival, we were ready, not to relive old humiliations, but to demonstrate clearly the strength, resilience, and quiet dignity earned through 15 years of dedicated growth. Assembly space looked different this time as our fleet approached, not because the stars had changed, but because everything I noticed carried new meaning. The massive station that had once seemed impossibly grand now appeared worn, its once brilliant lights dimmed in places, maintenance clearly neglected as resources were redirected toward more urgent crises across member worlds. I stood at the helm of the Meridian, watching as our relief fleet, 5 ships strong, moved steadily toward the docking arms of the Central Assembly Station. Unlike our first arrival 15 years earlier, there was no elaborate reception waiting for us, no delegation gathered to judge our worthiness. Instead, station officials communicated urgently, providing docking coordinates without ceremony, their voices carrying visible exhaustion. As we docked, I noticed immediately how different the station felt compared to my memory of it. Corridors once pristine now showed signs of neglect, cracked panels left unrepaired, lighting systems flickering unevenly. Small groups of assembly citizens moved through hallways with visible weariness, faces marked by the strain of prolonged hardship. Velen met us personally at the docking bay, older now, his once smooth gray skin showing signs of age and stress. He greeted me with quiet sincerity, extending a hand in a gesture he must have learned meant something significant to humans. "Captain Reyes," he said, "thank you for coming." "We're here to help," I replied simply, shaking his offered hand firmly. He led us through the station toward the central medical facility, explaining conditions along the way. The disease affecting outer worlds had indeed spread significantly, now present even within core assembly systems. Food shortages had grown severe enough that rationing had become standard practice across most member worlds, tensions rising steadily among a population unaccustomed to such hardship. As we walked, I noticed several assembly citizens pause to watch our group pass, their expressions carrying a mixture of curiosity, cautious hope, and something else I recognized immediately: quiet embarrassment. Word had clearly spread that humanity, once mocked and dismissed, had returned not with resentment, but with genuine assistance. Our medical teams began deploying immediately upon reaching the central facility, setting up portable clinics using technology refined significantly since our first proposal, 15 years earlier. Assembly medical staff watched with visible surprise as our scanners quickly identified disease patterns their own advanced systems had struggled to fully understand, our treatments proving effective within hours rather than the extended trials their own methods required. Meanwhile, agricultural specialists from our fleet began working alongside local farmers, introducing disease-resistant seed varieties developed through years of careful research. I watched as skepticism among local farmers slowly transformed into cautious optimism, their initial doubts fading as they witnessed firsthand the effectiveness of solutions they had once been taught to dismiss as beneath their advanced civilization. It was during this initial deployment that I encountered Director Kesserin again, older now, his once confident posture visibly diminished by the weight of recent years. He approached me cautiously as I oversaw equipment deployment near the central plaza, his expression carrying none of the arrogance I remembered from our first meeting. "Captain Reyes," he said, his voice quieter than I remembered, "I did not expect your species to answer our call, given how we treated your delegation previously." I considered my response carefully, remembering clearly the humiliation experienced in that council chamber years earlier, yet also remembering the quiet resolve that had brought us back despite that painful history. "We came because people needed help," I said honestly. "That reason has not changed, regardless of how we were treated before." Kesserin studied me for a long moment, something shifting visibly behind his tired eyes. "Your species continues to surprise us," he admitted quietly. "Perhaps we were wrong to judge your worth so quickly." I did not respond immediately, allowing his words to settle naturally, rather than offering easy forgiveness or false reassurance. Instead, I gestured toward our medical teams working diligently nearby. "Judge us by what you see now," I said simply. Over the following days, our relief efforts expanded rapidly across multiple assembly worlds, each mission reinforcing the same quiet message, that solutions once dismissed as primitive were, in fact, exactly what the crisis required. Disease outbreaks began stabilizing under treatments developed by human medical teams. Agricultural yields slowly improved as disease-resistant crops took root across previously barren fields. Word of humanity's efforts spread quickly across assembly networks, the same channels once used to broadcast our earlier humiliation, now carrying reports of genuine gratitude from struggling member worlds. Public sentiment within the assembly shifted rapidly, admiration replacing the mockery that had once defined their view of humanity. During one particularly significant moment, I stood alongside Velen as disease-resistant crops were harvested successfully, for the first time, on one of the hardest-hit outer worlds. Local farmers gathered around the fields, visibly emotional as they witnessed healthy produce growing from soil that had failed them repeatedly over recent years. 15 years ago, Velen said quietly, watching the harvest alongside me, our council dismissed exactly this solution, calling it unworthy of serious consideration. Solutions don't require approval to work, I replied. They only require the willingness to try them. He nodded slowly, understanding clearly the deeper meaning behind my words. I wonder sometimes, he admitted, how differently things might have unfolded had our council listened 15 years ago, rather than allowing pride to guide their decisions. I considered his question carefully before responding. The past cannot be changed, I said, but the present offers a chance to choose differently, and that choice matters more than any mistake made previously. As our relief efforts continued expanding, official communication arrived from the Assembly Council, requesting a formal meeting with our delegation, this time held not in the Grand Council chamber where we had once been humiliated, but in a smaller, more private setting reflecting the genuine urgency of the situation. I attended alongside Bennett, who had traveled separately to oversee the diplomatic aspects of our mission, and Cole, whose scientific expertise remained invaluable throughout our relief efforts. As we entered the meeting room, I recognized several familiar faces among the Assembly delegation, including Director Kesserin, visibly humbled compared to his previous confident demeanor. The meeting began quietly, official acknowledgments made regarding humanity's assistance, gratitude expressed formally on behalf of the Assembly Council. Yet beneath the formal language, I sensed something deeper, genuine recognition finally forming regarding the true value of solutions once mocked and dismissed. Kesserin himself addressed our delegation directly toward the end of the meeting, his voice carrying visible sincerity. 15 years ago, he said, we judged your species based on assumptions rooted deeply in pride. Today, we recognize clearly how mistaken those assumptions were. Bennett responded calmly, her voice steady and measured. Humanity did not return seeking apology, she said. We returned because circumstances demanded compassion over resentment, understanding over pride. Her words settled over the room, quiet acknowledgement passing visibly among the Assembly delegation. As the meeting concluded, I found myself reflecting deeply on the strange, quiet reversal we had witnessed. A species once eager for approval, now standing confidently, offering genuine assistance from a position earned through years of dedication, rather than desperate validation. Yet even amid this quiet victory, I understood clearly that our work remained far from finished. Assembly space still faced significant challenges ahead, and humanity's role in addressing those challenges would continue shaping not only our relationship with the Assembly, but our broader standing among civilizations across the galaxy. Weeks turned into months as our relief efforts continued stabilizing conditions across Assembly space. Disease outbreaks that once threatened billions of lives slowly came under control, agricultural systems recovered steadily, and quiet gratitude replaced the mockery that had once defined the Assembly's view of humanity. Yet as I reflected on everything that had unfolded, I began to understand a deeper truth taking shape across the galaxy, one far more significant than simple gratitude or diplomatic reconciliation. Word of humanity's assistance had spread far beyond Assembly space itself, reaching smaller species and independent worlds who had long observed the rigid, prideful hierarchy maintained by older, more established civilizations like the Kalan Assembly. What began as quiet admiration soon transformed into something larger, a growing recognition across the galaxy that adaptability, humility, and genuine compassion carried far greater value than advanced technology alone. I remember standing alongside Cole during a quiet moment near the conclusion of our mission, watching as newly harvested fields stretched across what had once been barren, disease-ravaged land. Farmers moved through the fields with quiet confidence, their earlier skepticism long replaced by genuine trust in solutions once dismissed as unworthy of serious consideration. You were right, I said to him, breaking the comfortable silence between us. This was never really about proving them wrong. Cole nodded slowly, his gaze distant, thoughtful. No, he agreed. It was about proving something far more important, that strength doesn't always look the way people expect it to. As our mission approached its natural conclusion, Official assembly leadership requested one final gathering, this time held publicly within the same Grand Council chamber where humanity had once been humiliated 15 years earlier. Unlike our first visit, however, the atmosphere within the chamber carried none of the previous arrogance or dismissiveness. Instead, delegates from across dozens of species gathered quietly, genuine respect visible in their expressions as our delegation entered the room. Director Kesserin addressed the gathered assembly directly, his voice carrying visible humility absent during our first encounter. 15 years ago, he began, we stood in this very chamber and dismissed an offer of genuine assistance, blinded by pride and misplaced confidence in our own advanced understanding. He paused, allowing his words to settle over the silent chamber before continuing. Today we stand humbled, grateful for the compassion shown by a species we once mocked without hesitation. Let this serve as a lesson, not only to the assembly, but to every civilization represented within these walls, that true wisdom lies not in judging others by their apparent simplicity, but in recognizing the genuine strength found in humility, resilience, and unwavering compassion. A quiet murmur of agreement spread through the chamber, delegates from numerous species nodding respectfully toward our delegation. I glanced toward Bennett and Cole, both visibly moved by the significance of the moment, understanding clearly how dramatically perceptions had shifted since our humiliating first encounter all those years earlier. Bennett rose to address the chamber directly, her voice calm, measured, carrying quiet dignity rather than triumph. Humanity did not return seeking vindication, she said. We returned because circumstances demanded compassion, and because we believed firmly that genuine strength is measured not by how advanced one's technology appears, but by the willingness to help others, regardless of past treatment. Her words resonated deeply within the chamber, quiet applause rising respectfully among the gathered delegates, a stark contrast to the mocking laughter we had experienced during our initial visit 15 years earlier. As the gathering concluded, Velen approached me privately, his expression carrying quiet reflection. I often wondered, he admitted, what kind of galaxy we might have built had pride never clouded our judgment 15 years ago. I considered his words carefully before responding. Perhaps this is exactly the galaxy we were meant to build, I said. One shaped not by easy acceptance, but by genuine understanding, earned through hardship and reflection. He nodded slowly, understanding clearly the deeper meaning behind my words. Your species carries a quiet strength, he said. One I doubt many truly understood, until circumstances forced them to see it clearly. As our fleet finally prepared to depart assembly space, concluding our extended relief mission, I found myself reflecting deeply on everything that had unfolded since that humiliating first encounter 15 years earlier. Humanity had not returned seeking revenge, nor had we sought validation from a civilization that had once dismissed us so easily. Instead, we had returned simply because circumstances demanded compassion, and because we remained committed to the same values that had guided us since our very first attempt to offer help. Standing once more on the observation deck of the Meridian, as we prepared for departure, I watched the massive assembly station shrink slowly into the distance, its lights now shining brighter than I remembered, restored gradually, as recovery efforts across member worlds continued steadily. I thought back to that nervous young engineer who had once stood anxiously in the cargo bay of the horizon, uncertain of what awaited him among the stars. So much had changed since then, not only for myself personally, but for humanity as a whole. We had faced humiliation, endured mockery, and yet remained steadfast in our commitment to genuine compassion, ultimately proving that true strength often lies hidden beneath simplicity, humility, and unwavering resilience. The galaxy's perception of humanity had shifted dramatically, no longer viewing us as a primitive species unworthy of serious consideration, but instead recognizing quietly the genuine value we brought through resilience, adaptability, and compassion earned through years of dedicated growth. Yet even amid this quiet victory, I understood clearly that our journey among the stars remained far from finished. The galaxy was vast, filled with countless civilizations, each carrying its own history, its own challenges, and its own lessons yet to be learned. Humanity's role within that vast, complex tapestry had only just begun to take shape, guided not by pride or the pursuit of approval, but by quiet, unwavering compassion. As the meridian finally turned away from assembly space, beginning our long journey back toward Earth, I felt a quiet sense of peace settle over me, knowing clearly that whatever challenges awaited humanity in the years ahead, we would face them guided by the same values that had brought us this far: humility, resilience, and an unwavering commitment to helping others, regardless of how we ourselves had once been treated. 15 years earlier, humanity had been mocked, humiliated, and dismissed by a civilization far older and more advanced than our own. Today, that same civilization looked toward us with quiet respect, gratitude, and genuine admiration. The galaxy's true nightmare, I realized, had never truly been humanity's arrival among the stars. It was the quiet, unwavering resilience we carried within us all along, one that no amount of mockery or dismissal could ever truly diminish.